The dust had turned to mud under her feet, and Penelope Jordan knew she was running out of time when the first sharp pain seized her belly, just as she stumbled into Awahi, Nevada, with nothing but the torn dress on her back and $3 sewn into her hem. The town looked wrong from the moment she crossed onto Main Street. Every building shuttered tight, planks of raw lumber nailed crosswise over doorways like the whole place had been sealed up against some invisible plague. Her husband was 6 feet under in Colorado, killed by a runaway mining cart 3 months past, and she had nowhere else to go except to the aunt she barely remembered who supposedly lived somewhere in this God-forsaken corner of Nevada. The sun beat down mercilessly on this September day in 1882, and sweat mixed with the dust coating her face as she pressed one hand to her swollen stomach and searched desperately for a single open door, a single sign of welcome in this town of barricaded buildings. She walked past the general store, nailed shut, the saloon, nailed shut, the boarding house, nailed shut. Even the church had fresh boards crisscrossed over its entrance, and she felt panic rising in her throat like bile. Her feet ached, her back screamed, and the baby inside her was sitting so low now she could barely walk without waddling. Another contraction gripped her, and she gasped, leaning against a hitching post as she waited for it to pass. When she looked up through watering eyes, she saw a man standing in the middle of the street watching her. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that seemed to measure everything about her in a single glance. He wore a dusty brown hat, work-worn leather chaps, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips like it belonged there. More importantly, he was the first living soul she had seen since entering this ghost town, and she straightened up as much as she could manage. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking. "I need help. I need somewhere to rest. Is there anyone here?" The man approached slowly, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw covered in several days of stubble and a mouth set in a hard line. His eyes, though, were not unkind, just cautious. "You picked a bad time to come to Awahi," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Town is under quarantine. Yellow fever came through 2 weeks ago. The territorial health officer ordered every public building sealed until further notice. Most folks who did not get sick already left for Elko or Virginia City." Penelope felt the world tilt slightly. "I have nowhere to go. My husband died. I was trying to reach my aunt, Martha Whitley, but I do not know where she lives, and I cannot keep walking, and the baby is coming soon, maybe days, maybe hours. I do not know any more." She hated the desperation in her own voice, hated that she was begging a stranger, but pride would not keep her alive, and neither would it shelter her child. The man studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing something internal, some calculation between risk and compassion. "Martha Whitley died in the first wave," he said finally, and his words hit her like a physical blow. "I am sorry. She was a good woman." Penelope felt her knees give out. She did not mean to fall, but suddenly the ground was rushing up and strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt. The man lifted her easily, one arm under her knees and one behind her back, and she was too exhausted to protest. "I have a place just outside town," he said, already moving. "It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a roof. I have been staying away from the main street since the fever hit, keeping to myself. I have not gotten sick yet, and neither has anyone at my ranch because there is nobody there but me and the horses." "Why are you here then?" she managed to ask as her head lolled against his shoulder. "Came in for supplies before I realized the whole town had been locked down. Been trying to figure out how to pry open the general store without getting arrested for breaking quarantine, but the marshal is still patrolling, sick or not." He carried her past the last of the buildings and toward a small house set back from the road, nestled against the scrubby hills. Unlike everything else in town, this door had no boards across it, though she could see nail holes in the frame where someone had started the job and abandoned it. "This is yours?" she asked. "Was my parents' place. They died 5 years back, not from fever, just from living hard and getting old before their time. I kept it even though I spend most of my time out at the ranch." He shifted her weight and managed to get the door open with his shoulder. The interior was dim and dusty but blessedly cool. He carried her to a small bedroom and laid her on a quilt-covered bed that smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco. "What is your name?" Penelope asked as he straightened up. "Mason Hunt," he said. "And you are Penelope Jordan." "Penny, most people call me." "Well, Penny, let me see what supplies I have here. Do you need water? Food?" "Both," she admitted. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." He nodded and disappeared into another room. She heard him moving around, heard the clank of a pump and water splashing. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe through the exhaustion and fear. Her baby kicked hard against her ribs as if to remind her that she did not have the luxury of falling apart. She had to survive this, had to find a way forward, even if her aunt was dead, and she was stranded in a quarantined town with a stranger who might be kind or might be something else entirely. Mason returned with a cup of water and a plate containing bread, dried meat, and some withered apples. "It is not fancy, but it is what I have. Eat slowly. If you have not had much, your stomach will rebel if you go too fast." She took the water gratefully and drank, then made herself nibble at the bread even though she wanted to devour everything on the plate. He stood in the doorway watching her, and she noticed he kept his distance, probably worried about fever even though she showed no signs of it. "How far along are you?" he asked after a moment. 8 months, near as I can figure. The baby is due in October. And your husband?" "Dead," she said flatly. "Mining accident in Leadville. We had only been married a year. He left me nothing but debts, and his family wanted nothing to do with me once he was gone. My aunt was the only family I had left. I walked most of the way here, caught a few wagon rides when I could." "That is a hell of a journey for a woman in your condition." "I did not have much choice." She took another bite of bread and chewed slowly. "Why did you help me? You could have left me in the street." Mason leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. "My mother always said you help people when they need it because someday you will be the one needing help. Besides, leaving a pregnant woman to faint in the street is not something I could live with. Even with the quarantine. You do not have fever. I can see that much. You are just exhausted and hungry and scared." His eyes softened slightly. "Look, I am not saying this is a good situation. The quarantine will last at least another week, maybe more. You cannot leave town without getting stopped by the territorial guards, and they will just send you back or worse. So you are stuck here and I am stuck here, and we might as well make the best of it. I do not want to be a burden." "Too late for that," he said, but there was something almost amused in his tone. "Rest now. We will figure out the details later." He left her alone, and she finished eating before exhaustion pulled her down into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, the room was darker and cooler, and she could hear sounds from outside, the whinny of a horse and the creak of a wagon. She struggled to sit up, her back protesting, and managed to swing her legs over the side of the bed. Her whole body ached, but the rest had helped more than she wanted to admit. She stood carefully and made her way to the front room. Mason was there, hauling in supplies from a wagon parked just outside. He glanced at her as she appeared in the doorway. "You are awake. Good. I got into the general store. You broke the quarantine. She felt a flutter of worry. I pried the boards off my own store, he said. Technically, I own the place. My father left it to me along with the house. I have been letting a manager run it, but he got the fever and left for his sister's place in California, so it has been sitting empty. I figured nobody would miss a few supplies, and if they do, I will pay myself back later. Despite everything, Penelope felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. You robbed yourself. Sounds better than breaking quarantine. He set down a sack of flour and dusted off his hands. I got enough to last us a few weeks if we are careful. Flour, beans, coffee, some canned goods, medical supplies just in case. There was also fabric and thread, and I thought you might want to make yourself something to wear that is not falling apart. She looked down at her dress, torn at the hem and stained with dust and sweat, and felt a flush of embarrassment. Thank you, I can sew. I can earn my keep that way if you need mending. I always need mending, he said. But right now, I need you to stay healthy and keep that baby safe. Everything else can wait. Over the next few days, they fell into an uneasy routine. Mason slept in the main room on a bedroll while Penelope kept the bedroom. He cooked simple meals, and she helped when she could, though he insisted she rest more than she worked. They talked in fits and starts, sharing pieces of their lives like cautious card players revealing their hands one card at a time. She learned that Mason had inherited not just the store and house, but a small cattle ranch about 10 miles outside Awahi. He ran it mostly alone with the help of a few seasonal hands, and he had been planning to drive his cattle to market in California come spring. He was 24, had never been married, and had a quiet intensity about him that she found both intimidating and oddly comforting. He learned that she was 21, had grown up in Missouri on a farm that failed when she was 15, and had met her late husband at a church social in Kansas. She had followed him west with dreams of a better life, only to watch him work himself into an early grave chasing silver that never materialized. She did not tell Mason everything, did not mention the nights her husband came home drunk and angry, or the way he had blamed her when months passed, and she did not get pregnant, only to turn cold and distant when she finally did. Some things were better left buried. On the fourth day, she woke to find Mason in the front room sharpening a knife, and she watched him from the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Why have you never married?" He looked up, surprised. "Never found the right woman, I suppose." "Most women around here want a man who will stay put, run a business in town, give them a proper house with neighbors and social calls. I am not that man. I like the open range, the quiet, the way you can see for miles without spotting another soul. It is not a life that appeals to most." "It sounds lonely." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it is mine." She sat down in the chair across from him, lowering herself carefully. "What will you do when the quarantine lifts? Go back to the ranch, get ready for winter? What will you do?" "I do not know." The admission hurt. "I have $3 and nowhere to go. I suppose I will have to find work somewhere, though who will hire a woman with a new baby? I cannot imagine." Mason was quiet for a long moment, the rasp of the whetstone against steel filling the silence. Finally, he said, "You could stay. Here. At the ranch. I could use help and you need a place. It would not be charity. You would work, help with the house, the cooking, the accounts. I am terrible with numbers. Once the baby comes and you are recovered, there is plenty to do. It would be a fair exchange." Penelope stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden expectation. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. You are strong, you are resourceful, and you do not complain even when you have every reason to. That is more than I can say for most people. People would talk. A single woman living with a single man. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. I do not much care what people say." He met her eyes steadily. "Think about it. You do not have to decide now." But she was already thinking about it, turning the offer over in her mind like a coin, examining both sides. It was practical, logical, and yet it felt like something more, some door opening that she had not expected to find. That night, she lay in bed and felt the baby move, a strong rolling motion that pressed against her hand. She thought about her husband, dead in the ground, and felt only a distant sadness, like mourning someone she had never really known. She thought about Mason, quiet and steady, offering her a lifeline without asking for anything in return, at least not anything he said out loud. She wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted to believe that her life could be something other than a series of desperate scrambles from one disaster to the next. The quarantine lasted another 10 days, and in that time, Penelope made herself useful. She sewed new dresses from the fabric Mason had brought, simple calico things that fit her swollen body and would be easy to move in once the baby came. She mended every piece of clothing Mason owned, fixing tears and replacing buttons. She cooked when he would let her, made bread that rose high and golden, stews that simmered all day and filled the house with warmth. She cleaned the dust from every corner, washed windows until they gleamed, and slowly transformed the neglected house into something that felt almost like a home. Mason watched her with quiet appreciation, and she caught him sometimes staring at her as if trying to figure out a puzzle. They talked more easily now, conversations flowing over meals and during the long evenings when the heat finally broke and they could sit outside on the small porch. He told her about the ranch, about the wild horses he sometimes saw running in the hills, about the winter he got snowed in for 3 weeks and thought he might go mad from the isolation. She told him about learning to read from her mother's Bible, about the day she saw the ocean for the first time in San Francisco, about her hope that her child would have a better life than she had known. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mason said, "You never answered my question about staying." Penelope was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on her belly where the baby was kicking. "I want to say yes, but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of depending on someone again, of trusting that it will work out." She looked at him, and in the fading light his face was all shadows and angles. "My husband made promises too. He said he would take care of me, that we would build something together. Then he died and left me with nothing." "I cannot promise I will not die," Mason said. "Life is uncertain out here, but I can promise that if you stay, I will do right by you. You will have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and a fair wage for fair work, and your child will be safe. Why does it matter to you? You could hire anyone." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My mother was like you. She came west with my father because she had nowhere else to go, and she worked herself to the bone making a life out of nothing. She never complained, never asked for more than what she had. When she died, my father just gave up, lost the will to keep going. I watched them both fade away, and I swore I would not let that happen to anyone else if I could help it." He looked at her then, and his eyes were fierce. "You deserve better than fading away, Penny, so does your child." She felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built to keep herself safe. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." His smile was small but genuine. "Good." The territorial health officer arrived 2 days later, a harried-looking man with spectacles, an official seal stamped on his leather bag. He inspected the town, declared the quarantine lifted, and posted notices that businesses could reopen. By noon, the sound of hammers echoed through the streets as people pried boards off doors and windows, letting light and air back into spaces that had been sealed for weeks. Mason and Penelope stood on the porch and watched the town come back to life. "We should leave tomorrow," he said. "Get to the ranch before you get too uncomfortable to travel." She nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "What is it like, the ranch?" "Small. One main house, a bunkhouse that is usually empty this time of year, a barn, a few outbuildings. About 300 head of cattle scattered over rough country. A creek runs through the property, so we have good water year-round. The house needs work, but it is solid." "It sounds perfect," he glanced at her. "It sounds isolated." "I do not mind isolated." They left Awahi the next morning in a wagon loaded with supplies. Mason drove while Penelope sat beside him, one hand braced against the seat as they jolted over the rough road. The land stretched out around them, brown and gold and endlessly open, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stunted tree. Mountains rose in the distance, hazy and blue against the sky. The journey took most of the day, and by the time they arrived, Penelope was exhausted and sore. But when she saw the ranch, something in her chest eased. The house was small and weathered, but it sat in a sheltered valley with the creek running silver through the middle. Trees grew along the water, their leaves already turning gold with the approaching autumn. The barn was sturdy, and she could see cattle grazing on the hillside beyond. Mason helped her down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment just looking. "It is beautiful. It is home," he said simply. He carried her belongings inside while she followed slowly, taking in every detail. The house was sparsely furnished but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, 2 small bedrooms, and a loft above. Windows on every wall let in light, and she could already imagine curtains hanging there, brightening the space. "You take the bedroom on the right," Mason said. "It is bigger, and you will need the space once the baby comes. I will take the other one." She wanted to argue, but practicality won out. "Thank you." Over the next few weeks, they settled into their new life together. Mason worked from dawn to dusk, riding out to check on cattle, mending fences, preparing for winter. Penelope made the house her own, scrubbing and organizing, cooking meals that Mason ate with obvious appreciation. Her belly grew impossibly larger, and she moved more slowly now, but she refused to be idle. She started a garden plot near the house, planting vegetables that would come up in the spring. She hung curtains she sewed from spare fabric. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, and to predict when the wind would shift and bring rain. Mason was a quiet presence, steady and reliable. He never crowded her, never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond the work she did. But she noticed small things, the way he always made sure she had the most comfortable chair, the way he brought her wildflowers once when he rode in from the range, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. She noticed, too, how she had started looking forward to the evenings when the work was done and they would sit together, talking about everything and nothing. She noticed how safe she felt here, how the constant tension she had carried for so long was slowly unwinding. She noticed that when she thought about the future, she saw Mason in it, and that realization both thrilled and terrified her. October came in cool and clear, and Penelope woke one morning to a cramping pain that she recognized immediately. She lay still for a moment, breathing through it, then got up and found Mason already in the kitchen making coffee. "It is time," she said, and his head snapped up. "The baby." "Yes. The pain started just now. It could be hours still, but I wanted you to know." She saw fear flash across his face before he controlled it. "What do you need me to do?" "Boil water. Get clean linens. There is a box in my room with supplies. Bring that to me. And Mason." She waited until he looked at her. "Do not panic. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But always with help. A midwife, a doctor, someone who knows what they are doing. I know what I am doing well enough. I helped deliver my neighbor's babies back in Missouri. I know the signs, the stages. We will manage." She spoke with more confidence than she felt, but she could not let him see her fear. She went back to the bedroom and began preparing, laying out the linens, checking the supplies she had gathered over the past weeks. The pains came in waves, still far apart but growing stronger. Mason brought everything she asked for, and she could see his hands shaking slightly as he set the basin of hot water on the dresser. "I will be right outside if you need me." "Stay," she said suddenly. "Please, I do not want to be alone." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, tell me what to do." The labor lasted through the day and into the night. The pains grew stronger, closer together, until Penelope lost track of time, and there was only the overwhelming force of her body doing what it was made to do. Mason stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand when she needed something to grip, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking to her in a low, steady voice that kept her anchored. "You are doing fine," he said over and over. "You are strong. You can do this." And she did. In the early hours of the morning, as the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, she gave one final push and felt the baby slide free. The cry that followed was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Mason moved quickly, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket as Penelope had instructed. He brought the infant to her, and she saw tears on his face as he placed the tiny bundle in her arms. "A boy," he said, his voice rough. "You have a son." Penelope looked down at the red, squalling face and felt love crash over her like a wave. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." She let the baby nurse, marveling at how he knew instinctively what to do. Mason helped her deliver the afterbirth, cleaned up with an efficiency that surprised her, and made sure she was comfortable before finally sitting down in the chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes were bright. "You were amazing," he said. "I did not have much choice." But she smiled as she said it, giddy with relief and joy and exhaustion. "What will you name him?" She had thought about this, had carried possible names in her mind for months, but now, looking at her son, only one felt right. Paul Jordan." "Paul," Mason repeated. "It is a good name." He stood to leave to let her rest, but she caught his hand. "Thank you for everything." "For being here." He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "There is nowhere else I would have been." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but heavy with meaning. Then Mason squeezed her hand gently and left her to sleep. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless work. Penelope recovered slowly, her body healing while she learned the rhythms of motherhood. Paul was a good baby, hungry and loud but healthy. Mason helped more than she ever expected, holding the baby when she needed to sleep, heating water for washing, bringing her meals when she forgot to eat. She watched him with Paul and saw a gentleness she had not known he possessed. He held the infant with careful reverence, spoke to him in a soft murmur, and looked almost stricken when the baby cried. Once, she woke in the middle of the night to find the bedroom door open and Mason standing in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight from the main room. "Is everything all right?" she asked, alarmed. "I heard him fussing and wanted to make sure you were managing. We are fine. He just wanted to eat." She shifted the baby to her other breast, no longer self-conscious about such things with Mason. He had seen her through the most vulnerable moment of her life. There was no point in false modesty now. Mason came closer, sat down in the chair. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You ever regret it? Coming here, staying with me?" She looked at him in the dim light, at his serious face and the worry in his eyes. "No, not for a single moment. Do you regret offering?" "No, but I wonder sometimes if you feel trapped, if you think you had to stay because you had no other choice." "I did have a choice," she said. I could have left once the quarantine lifted, could have tried to make my way somewhere else. I stayed because I wanted to, because I felt something here that I have not felt anywhere else. What? Safe, valued, like I matter. She paused, gathering courage. Like maybe I could build something real. Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You matter to me, Penny, more than I think I realized until you were here." Her breath caught. "Mason, I am not good with words. I spend too much time alone talking to horses and cattle. But I need you to know that having you here, having Paul here, it has changed everything. This house feels like a home now. I wake up in the morning and look forward to the day instead of just enduring it. I see you with your son, and I think about what it would be like if this was our life, not just an arrangement but something real and permanent." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I am falling in love with you." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I know it is too soon. I know you just lost your husband, that you need time. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, and the words felt like truth and freedom all at once. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or convenience, but it is more than that. You make me feel alive again. You make me want to hope." Mason reached out and took her hand, the one not supporting Paul, and his touch was warm and solid. "Then let us hope together. Let us build something real." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He stayed with her until Paul finished nursing and fell asleep. And then he carried the baby to the cradle he had built and tucked him in with gentle hands. When he turned back to Penelope, she held out her arms and he came to her, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other in the quiet darkness, and Penelope thought that this was what she had been searching for all along. Not riches or adventure, but someone who would stand beside her, who would see her for who she was and choose her anyway. Winter came early that year, and by November, snow blanketed the valley. Mason worked harder than ever, making sure the cattle had access to water and fodder, that the barn was secure, that firewood was stacked high against the house. Penelope kept the home fires burning, cooked hearty meals that filled their bellies, and cared for Paul, who was growing strong and starting to smile. They fell into an easy intimacy, not physical yet but emotional, sharing confidences and dreams. Mason told her about the time he got lost in the mountains as a boy and spent a terrifying night alone before his father found him. Penelope told him about the years after her father's farm failed, when they lived on charity and scraps, and her mother cried herself to sleep every night. They shared their fears and their hopes, and with each conversation, the bond between them deepened. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire after Paul had gone to sleep, Mason said, "I want to marry you." Penelope looked up from the sock she was darning. "What? I want to marry you." "Properly? Not because it is practical or because people expect it, but because I love you and I want you to be my wife." He paused. "But only if you want that too. I know your first marriage was not happy. I know you might not want to risk that again." She set down the darning and turned to face him fully. "My first marriage was a mistake from the beginning. I was young and scared and thought I needed a man to save me, but I do not need you to save me, Mason. I just need you to stand beside me, and I think that is what makes this different." "Is that a yes?" "Yes, I will marry you." She felt a smile spreading across her face. Whenever you want. The roads are snowed in right now, so we would have to wait until spring to get to a town with a preacher, unless you want to ride all the way to Elko in the dead of winter." "Spring is fine. I am not going anywhere." He crossed the space between them and kissed her soft and sweet, and she felt warmth bloom in her chest. It was the first time they had kissed, and it felt like a promise, like the start of something new and good. That winter was hard in many ways, but it was also one of the happiest times of Penelope's life. She and Mason grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and quirks. She discovered that he sang to the horses when he thought no one was listening, that he had a sweet tooth for molasses cookies, that he could fix almost anything with patience and ingenuity. He learned that she was fiercely protective of those she loved, that she had a wicked sense of humor when she felt safe enough to show it, that she could read people with uncanny accuracy. Paul thrived, growing chubby and bright-eyed. He laughed at Mason's silly faces and reached for Penelope with chubby hands. Mason treated the baby as if he were his own, and Penelope knew that in all the ways that mattered, he was. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and budding trees. The first wildflowers pushed through the mud, and the cattle began calving. It was a busy, chaotic time, but there was joy in the work. They made plans to ride into Awahi as soon as the roads were passable to see the preacher and make their marriage legal. In April, with Paul bundled in blankets and the wagon loaded with supplies, they made the journey. Awahi had recovered from the fever outbreak, and the streets were busy with people and commerce. They found the preacher, a kind older man who asked no difficult questions, and stood before him in the small church while he spoke the words that bound them together. Penelope wore a dress she had sewn from blue calico, and Mason had trimmed his hair and shaved. Paul dozed in her arms as they said their vows, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed her with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. They celebrated with a meal at the hotel, the first time Penelope had eaten food she did not cook in months, and it tasted like the finest feast. The hotel owner, a woman who remembered Mason's parents, gave them a room for the night as a wedding gift, and they left Paul with her daughter, a capable girl of 16 who promised to take good care of him. Alone in the room, Penelope felt suddenly shy. She had been with a man before, but that had been obligation, not choice. This was different. Mason seemed to sense her nervousness because he took her hands and said, "We do not have to do anything you do not want to do." "I want to," she said. "I am just nervous." "So am I." That surprised her. "You are. I have been thinking about this for months, wanting to touch you, wanting to be close to you. Now that I can, I am terrified I will do something wrong." She laughed, and the sound broke the tension. "I think we will figure it out together," and they did. Mason was patient and gentle, and she discovered that intimacy could be something beautiful when it was born of love and respect. They lay together afterward in the soft lamplight, her head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders, and she felt complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, Penny Hunt." The name made her smile. Penny Hunt. It sounded strong and real, like someone who belonged somewhere. They returned to the ranch the next day, and life continued in its steady rhythm. Summer brought long days of work, repairing fences and branding calves, tending the garden and putting up preserves. Paul learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. Mason built a small fenced area outside where the baby could play safely, while Penelope worked in the garden. They hired 2 seasonal hands to help with the cattle drive in the fall, and Penelope met them with fresh bread and coffee, playing the role of ranch wife with ease. The men were polite and hardworking, and they treated her with respect, tipping their hats and calling her madam. In September, exactly 1 year after she had stumbled into Awahi, Penelope stood on the porch and watched Mason working with a new horse in the corral. Paul was on her hip, babbling and pointing. The land stretched out golden and peaceful under the late afternoon sun, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. Mason looked up and caught her watching. He grinned and she waved back. Later, when the work was done and they sat together watching the stars come out, he said, "Do you remember this day last year? Every moment of it. I was so scared." "I was too. I saw you in the street, and I knew if I walked away you would probably die. But I also knew if I helped you, my life would change. I am glad I chose to help." "I am glad you chose wrong," she teased. "What do you mean? You said if you walked away, I would die. If you helped, your life would change. You chose both, not one. My life was saved and yours was changed." "Then I chose right twice." He kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, and Penelope thought about all the doors that had been closed to her a year ago, all the ways her life could have ended in that dusty, shuttered town. But one door had opened, pried loose by a man with kind eyes and strong hands, and through that door she had found everything she never knew she needed. The years that followed were not always easy. They faced droughts and harsh winters, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly, and the constant challenges of ranching in unforgiving country. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Paul grew into a bright, curious boy who followed Mason everywhere, learning to ride and rope before he was 6 years old. When he was 3, Penelope gave birth to twin girls, Martha and Grace, named for her mother and Mason's mother. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of children, and Mason expanded it, adding another bedroom and a larger kitchen. 2 years after the twins came a second son, Samuel, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Penelope sometimes wondered how her life would have looked if she had never come to Awahi, if she had turned back or chosen a different town. But she never wondered for long because the life she had was the one she wanted. Mason became known as a fair rancher, honest in his dealings and good to his word. He expanded the ranch slowly, buying up adjacent land when it became available. Penelope kept the books and managed the household, proving herself indispensable. She also started teaching the children to read, using the books she ordered from catalogs and the Bible that had been her mother's. When Paul was 12, he asked about his real father, and Penelope told him the truth. "He was my husband, and he gave me you, and for that I will always be grateful. But Mason is your father in every way that matters. He chose you, chose us, and that is worth more than blood." Paul thought about this, then nodded. "I am glad he found you." "So am I, sweetheart, so am I." The ranch prospered. They weathered bad years with the savings from good ones. They built a new barn and a proper bunkhouse for the hands they hired each season. They became pillars of the small community that slowly grew up around Awahi, attending church socials and helping neighbors when they needed it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason took Penelope to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor. It was the first time they had been alone together since their wedding night, and they marveled at the city, at the noise and the crowds and the ocean stretching endless and blue. But they were both relieved to return home, to the quiet valley and the children who ran out to meet them. "I missed this," Penelope said as they drove up to the house. "The chaos, the family, our life, everything we have built." Mason reached over and took her hand. "We built something good, did we not? The best." More years passed. Paul grew tall and strong, and when he was 18, he announced he wanted to join the army. Penelope was terrified, but Mason supported his decision, understanding the boy's need to see the world beyond the ranch. Paul left on a warm June day, promising to write, and Penelope cried in Mason's arms that night. "He will be fine," Mason said. We raised him to be strong and smart. He will come back to us." And he did, 3 years later, older and more serious but whole. He brought with him a young woman he had met while stationed in Arizona, a rancher's daughter named Clara, and within a year they were married and building their own house on the far edge of the ranch property. The twins married too, both to local men who worked hard and treated them well. Martha stayed close, settling in Awahi with her husband who ran the livery stable. Grace moved to Elko with her husband, a doctor, and they visited as often as they could. Samuel stayed on the ranch, working beside his father and learning the business. He had Mason's steady temperament and Penelope's head for numbers, and it was clear the ranch would be in good hands when the time came. Penelope and Mason grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but the love between them never dimmed. They still sat together in the evenings, still held hands when they walked, still smiled at each other across the dinner table in a way that made their children shake their heads and laugh. When Penelope turned 50, they threw a party at the ranch, and the house filled with children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors. Someone played a fiddle and Mason led Penelope in a slow dance, holding her close. "You remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "In the street, covered in dust and about to faint. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," she laughed. "You are a terrible liar." "I am not lying. You looked lost and scared and fierce all at once, and I thought to myself, that is a woman worth knowing." And was I? "Worth knowing, worth everything." He kissed her softly. "You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before you came along. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive." Tears pricked her eyes. "We saved each other." "Yes, we did." They danced until the music stopped, and then they stood surrounded by the life they had created, the family they had raised, the home they had built. Penelope looked around at all the faces, at the love and laughter filling every corner, and she thought about that terrified girl who had stumbled into a town of closed doors so many years ago. She had been lost, desperate, alone. But one man had pried open his door, had offered her shelter and safety, and in doing so, had opened the door to everything else. To love and family, to purpose and belonging, to a life richer and fuller than she could have ever imagined. Mason caught her eye and she smiled back, her heart full to bursting. The town had been closed against her, every door sealed shut, but one had opened, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Grandchildren grew and brought great-grandchildren to visit. Paul's son took over the ranch operations eventually, as Samuel had other dreams and moved to California to study engineering. The ranch stayed in the family, though, a testament to all the work and love that had been poured into it. On a warm spring evening, when Penelope was 72 and Mason was 75, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and rose. The valley was green with new growth, and cattle grazed peacefully on the hillside. "I have been thinking," Mason said, his voice rougher now with age but still strong. "About what?" "About how lucky I am, how lucky we are." He squeezed her hand, his grip still firm despite the arthritis that plagued his fingers. "I never thought I would have all this. A wife I love more with each passing year, children and grandchildren who are good people, a ranch that will continue long after we are gone. It is more than I ever dreamed." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I would survive that day I walked into Awahi. I was so sure I was going to die, that my baby was going to die, that there was no hope left. Then you appeared and everything changed." "You changed everything for me too." They sat in peaceful silence as the light faded, Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. They had faced hardships and joys, losses and triumphs, and through it all, they had held on to each other. "Do you have any regrets?" Mason asked after a while. Penelope thought about it, really thought about it. "Only one," she said finally. "What?" "That we did not have more time. A lifetime does not seem like enough." He turned and kissed her forehead. "Then we will have to make sure we fill whatever time we have left with as much love and laughter as we can. I think we have been doing that all along. Then we will just keep doing it." And they did. Mason and Penelope lived out their years together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by family and the land they loved. When Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Penelope grieved deeply, but without regret. They had had 43 years together, and every one of them had been a gift. She lived another 5 years after Mason, watching over the ranch and her descendants with the same fierce love she had always possessed. When her time came, she went peacefully in the same bedroom where Paul had been born, where she and Mason had spent so many nights together. At her funeral, Paul stood up to speak. He was an old man himself now, with gray hair and grandchildren of his own. "My mother taught me many things," he said, his voice steady despite his tears. "She taught me to work hard, to be honest, to never give up. But the most important thing she taught me was about love. She showed me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day. She chose to love us, to love this land, to love the life she built with my father. And because of those choices, all of us are here today. We are her legacy, and we carry her love forward." They buried Penelope next to Mason on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Nevada sky they had both loved. The headstones were simple, marking the dates of their lives in a single line, "Together always." The ranch continued for generations after them, and the story of how it began became family legend, told and retold to wide-eyed children on summer evenings. The story of a pregnant woman who arrived in a town where every door was closed, and the cowboy who chose to pry his open, letting in not just one lost soul but a lifetime of love, family, and hope. In the end, it was a simple story, but it was also a profound one, the kind of story that reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything, that sometimes one open door is all it takes to transform a life, and that love, when given freely and nurtured carefully, can create something that lasts far beyond our own brief time on this earth. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, and on warm spring evenings, if you listen carefully, you might hear echoes of laughter from the porch, the sound of children playing, the murmur of two voices speaking softly in the gathering dusk. The legacy of Penelope and Mason Hunt lives on in the land they tended, the family they raised, and the love story they wrote together, one day at a time, in the wild, beautiful country of Nevada's high desert. Their descendants still tell the story of how it all began, of the desperate woman and the compassionate cowboy, of closed doors and the one that opened, of a life built from nothing but hope and hard work, and the kind of love that endures through every season, every hardship, every joy. It is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth carrying forward into whatever future awaits. Because in the end, we all need to believe that somewhere out there is a door that will open for us, a person who will choose to help when help is needed most, a chance to build something meaningful from the ruins of what came before. Penelope and Mason found that in each other, and their story stands as proof that even in the hardest times, in the most unlikely places, love can take root and flourish, creating beauty and meaning that echoes through the years. The sun sets over the ranch every evening, just as it did on that first night when Penelope lay in the small bedroom, exhausted and scared, not knowing what the future would bring. The same stars come out, the same wind whispers through the valley. But everything is different now because of the choices they made, the love they shared, the life they built together in the wild Nevada territory. And if you stand on that porch at sunset and close your eyes, you can almost see them there, Mason and Penelope, sitting side by side, hands clasped, watching the day fade into night, content in the knowledge that they found each other when it mattered most, that they built something real and lasting, that their story, like their love, would endure long after they were gone. The ranch remains a testament to their legacy, to the truth that one act of compassion can change everything, that one open door can lead to a lifetime of love, and that the best stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but about the quiet, steady choice to love someone through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. Mason chose to help Penelope when she needed it most, and in doing so, he saved not just her life, but his own, giving both of them something neither had dared to hope for, a future filled with love, family, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. As the last light fades from the sky and the first stars appear, the ranch settles into peaceful silence, watched over by the spirits of those who built it, loved it, and left it better than they found it. The story continues in the hearts and lives of their descendants, in the land that still bears the marks of their labor, in the love that flows through the family like a river, connecting past to present to future in an unbroken chain. This is the legacy of Penelope Jordan Hunt and Mason Hunt, the pregnant woman who arrived in a town of closed doors and the cowboy who pried his open, inviting her into a life neither of them expected but both of them embraced with courage, hope, and an enduring love that changed everything. Their story reminds us all that we have the power to change someone's life with a single choice, that love can grow in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, when all the doors around us are closed, all we need is one person willing to open theirs and invite us in.